The big problem, and we have a few problems, but like one major problem is that we're guided almost solely by GDP, stock market prices, and profitability.
First look at third quarter GDP.
Fourth quarter GDP looking at 2.6%.
New GDP numbers show the U.S. economy grew by 4.1%.
S&P 500 jumping to a new all-time high.
The stock market returned to record levels on Monday.
80% of the stock market wealth is held by the top 8% of Americans. The bottom 50% of Americans own essentially zero.
Yeah.
So you're beating people over the head saying stock markets are up. We need to evolve. We need to actually start pushing the way we think of economic progress to include how our families are doing, how our children are doing, and things that would actually matter to the American people, because GDP is going to lead us off a cliff.
So how do we shift to an economy that we'd actually be excited about? We have to change the measurements. So instead of GDP, this phantom number that we made up almost 100 years ago, and even the inventor of GDP said three things. He said, one, this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. Number two, he said, we should include parenthood because it's so important. And number three, we should not include national defense spending because it adds no economic value. So instead of GDP, what should we be focusing on? How about our own health and mental health? How about how clean our air and water are? How about average income and affordability? So these are the problems of this era. GDP is at a record high. Meanwhile, our life expectancy has actually gotten shorter for the past 3 years. And our life expectancy has gotten shorter because drug overdoses and suicides have overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in this country for the first time in our history. And we have to recognize this is a disease of capitalism run amok. There was a point when there were more opiate prescriptions in the state of Ohio than human beings in the state of Ohio. And for some reason, the federal government thought that was appropriate. They ended up levying a $600 million fine against Purdue Pharma, which sounds like a lot of money, until you realize that company made $30 billion. They got a 2% fine, and they killed tens of thousands of Americans 8 an hour. So if the government turned a blind eye to this company spreading a plague among its people, then the least we can do is put the resources to work in our communities so our people have a fighting chance to get well. You know the last time our life expectancy declined 3 years in a row? The Great Flu Pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu. That's the last time our life expectancy declined for 3 years in a row. And yet we're celebrating this GDP that means nothing to us while our people are dying earlier.
What should the purpose of our economy be if it's not our well-being? And right now, GDP is going to get higher and higher as technology does more and more of us are going to be left behind and depressed and anxious.
Yeah.
And so if you don't get those measurements right, then you wind up in this tug of war that I think many of us are already feeling. If you look at the backdrop, we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Missouri, and those communities have never recovered. Where if you look at the numbers, half of the workers left the workforce and never worked again, and then half of that group filed for disability. Now, what happened to the manufacturing workers is now going to happen to the truck drivers, retail workers, call centers, fast food workers, and on through the economy as we evolve and technology marginalizes the labor of more and more Americans.
Shouldn't people who cite unemployment statistics be penalized for saying something so stupid?
Yeah, we have a series of bad numbers, and I referred to GDP as one. Certainly the headline unemployment rate is completely misleading. Yes. And one of my mandates as president is I'm going to update the numbers so they actually make sense to the American people.
Yes, so we can know what's going on. Otherwise, we can't make wise decisions.
Yeah, right now, again, and you know this, our life expectancy has declined for the last 3 years. How can you say an economy is healthy when our people are dying? It makes no sense.
I literally couldn't. I don't even know what you think on the other issues, and I just support what you said so much.
We're going to let the country know that it's not left, it's not right.
Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Put the money in our hands. Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.